Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to the Spirit Girl Talk Show podcast. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Hala Khouri, who is a therapist, the author of Peace from Anxiety. Get grounded, build resistance, and stay connected amidst the chaos. She's also a somatic psychology trained therapist and practitioner, a yoga teacher. She is totally into social justice and wanting to create a world where we all feel good, loved, and connected. Hala, welcome to the Spirit Girl podcast show. I'm so grateful to have you here. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm actually doing really great today. I'm having a really wonderful, grounded day. So happy to be getting to speak with you, Yvette.
And I welcome all of our global audience who is tuning in right around the world. A big hello to everyone, and so grateful you're here today with Hala Khouri and myself. So Hala, before we dive into your book, are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon, and we moved to the United States when I was 3 years old because of the violence and the political and economic unrest. And I always start that way because I feel like our original trauma also becomes our gift and our purpose oftentimes. And so being an immigrant, leaving the Middle East under those circumstances, it's not a big surprise that I became a trauma specialist, that I dedicated my life to the study of psychology, understanding trauma, and also this piece about collective well-being, coming from a region in so much pain and in so much chaos. I think I've always asked myself, how can we be well and how can we be well together? And so my path took me through studying yoga, studying psychology, teaching yoga, and I've been teaching yoga and movement for about 25 years and doing clinical work for 15 years. And I live here in Venice, California. I have 2 children, 2 boys, a middle schooler and a high schooler. And, so much of my work really comes out of my deep faith in humanity and my deep belief that at our core, we all want to belong, we all want to be loved. And that when people act in ways that's awful, it's rooted in trauma. And if we can understand how to heal from trauma, we can create a world that is great for everybody, not just for some. So a lot of my training has been in somatic experiencing, which is a trauma resolution technique, a lot of training in psychology and somatic practices. So that's a quick intro to who I am.
When it comes to trauma, I hear a lot about how it stays in our body. Can you share more about that?
So trauma is not about the event that happens to us. It's about how that event impacts us. And 2 people can have a similar experience and one person just walks away unscathed and another one walks away with symptoms of trauma. And so trauma occurs when when we're overwhelmed by an event and we're not able to cope, we're not able to respond. And often these are terrorizing events, terrorizing and overwhelming events. And this idea that trauma lives in the body on a physiological level has to do with the brain and the nervous system and how our bodies respond to these highly terrorizing events via things like fight, flight, freeze, or shut down. Traumatic events are highly activating. They flood us with sensation, with impulses, with emotions. But when we're overwhelmed, we shut down from those emotions. And so I often quote the work of Bessel van der Kolk, who we were talking about, as well as Peter Levine, who was my teacher. And they both say that trauma traps us in the past. The energy from the event, the emotions from the event that were too much for us to metabolize and to release get trapped in the body. And so people that are dealing with unresolved trauma, oftentimes, and I know this for myself, I can talk all about it. I can talk about the things that were difficult, but just talking about it is limited until we're able to discharge that energy from our bodies, until our nervous system catches up and actually we feel safe again. We're not resolving our traumas. And I've worked with so many survivors who understand their traumas, understand they should be feeling better because that event is over, but they don't. They still wake up in terror. They still can't be in safe relationships. And it's because that the activation, the energy from that event is still living inside of them. And so somatic work, which I know we're going to talk about today, can help rewire the brain and the nervous system so that we're wired to thrive. And that means integrating our trauma. It doesn't mean denying it.
And can we use as an example yoga to help feel into the body and then feel where the trauma might be and slowly release and work through that?
Yoga can be a really great tool. And the reason yoga can be, and I say can because not always, right? It really depends on who the teacher is, how they're holding space, that person's particular physiology. But what I appreciate about yoga postures and the physical practice of yoga is that there is an attention to presence in the body. Now, again, not all yoga. I practiced yoga for 15 years with none of that. I practiced yoga from a very sort of athletic, competitive, forcing my body, contorting my body into weird shapes. So just because it's yoga doesn't mean it's going to help us heal our traumas. Although there's more of an opportunity in yoga because of the emphasis on presence and breath. And when yoga is taught in a way that is about inviting people to stay present with their sensations, then it can be an opportunity to cultivate what we need to heal from stress and trauma, which is a word I really like called interoception. Interoception is about our capacity to sense what's going on inside of us. And when we're not able to sense what goes on inside of us, we can't heal it, right? There's a saying I love, we've got to feel it to heal it. And so yoga can be a tool to help us feel and then let go.
You've got to feel it to heal it. I love that. And at the moment, we have a lot of people in lockdown in Sydney and Melbourne and other parts of the world. How can we feel a bit more grounded when we're in a state of anxiety where our mind is thinking all of the time and trying to work it all out, but can't?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're alluding to the first part, which is what can we accept that we can't control? So much of what's going on with the pandemic and these lockdowns, is a loss of control. We don't know when they're going to end. We don't know if we're going to get sick. We don't know what's happening with our work. And that's a very difficult thing to accept, right? I don't mean to be like, oh, just accept it, right? It's not easy. And when we don't accept things that are hard, we only add to the pain. So accepting something doesn't mean you're giving up or you're not going to try to change it. It just means you accept how it is and you do your best to figure out how to change it. So I will first invite people to notice what their reaction to this really overwhelming situation is. In Buddhism, there's this metaphor of the second arrow, that the first arrow is like the suffering. And then we add our second arrow on top of the suffering, right? So there's enough necessary suffering. Let's remove the unnecessary parts we add. So that's my first invitation, is just try to be aware of what is being triggered in you that is not necessarily specifically about the circumstance. Try to release that in whatever way feels possible so that you have your energy available to deal with the circumstances. And this idea of being grounded, like you asked, when we are grounded, we can deal with stress much more easily and skillfully and effectively. And so grounding can mean literally feeling in your own body, your feet on the floor, your butt in the chair. In fact, I'm going to invite listeners to do that right now. Look for anything in your body right now that feels supportive or supported. So I'm feeling my lower back against this chair that I'm in. I notice my belly soften. I take a deep breath. Yeah, I see you taking a deep breath. For some people, it might be feeling their feet on the floor, or even my arms against the armrests. So anything that feels solid can help us settle. So even if you're having to do this grounding every 5 minutes, right? We might settle for a moment and then get activated and stressed. So grounding is a tool we have that can keep us from really getting completely burnt out in our nervous systems. If we're able to keep settling, that's very helpful.
Hala, that was absolutely so beautiful. I felt for a moment really grounded and really present. And I felt into my body, and I felt the chair, and like you said, touch something grounding, which was the desk.
Oh, good.
And it just felt like a moment of peace. Peace from anxiety, which is the title of your book, which I want to ask you now, diving into your book, Peace from Anxiety. What does that mean? And why were you inspired to write your book?
I was inspired to write the book for a few reasons. First was very personal after dealing with my own anxiety. And, my story is interesting because I didn't really have to deal with anxiety in a way that was overwhelming until my early 40s. So I was already a somatic therapist, a trauma specialist, a yoga teacher, right? I was teaching all this stuff and working with so many people struggling with trauma, symptoms, and anxiety. But I had never gone through it myself in that way. Like, of course, I had my own issues and neuroses and stuff. But in my early 40s, I got hit with substantial anxiety in a way that it wasn't debilitating because I had tools, right? I knew what to do to manage it. So I did all the things I tell my students and my clients to do. I reached out for support, up to my therapy sessions. I got a physical, right? But I really had my own humbling experience of first realizing that I think I became a trauma specialist subconsciously to try to avoid dealing with trauma myself. I figured if I became an expert and I was helping everybody, then I would never have to be the recipient of all the things that I was giving. And so I had to confront that in wanting to avoid my own anxiety since I was a child. I always put myself in the position of healer and helper. As the oldest of three, I was that to my younger siblings. I was the helper to my mother and my father. So I managed up until my early 40s to not have to feel my anxiety.
Wow.
By becoming an expert, which is really interesting. And it took me a couple of years to get a handle on my anxiety. It was not a quick fix. And again, I was managing. It didn't change my life on the external. I still was able to do everything I needed to do, but it took so much energy because when we're anxious, as many of you listeners know, it's exhausting because we're spending so much energy managing our anxiety, negotiating with life, trying to anticipate what bad thing could happen. It's exhausting. So even with all the tools I had, it took me a couple of years to go back to generally being okay and experiencing anxiety when it's called for. My anxiety happened 2014, 2015, right? So I had a few years there where I wasn't dealing with major trauma in life, but life felt overwhelming for me.
Wow.
And then what's ironic is once I got back to balance, then I started to experience all these major traumas. My mother got diagnosed with cancer. She died. My husband went into heart failure and had to have a pacemaker put in, and COVID hit. All of that. Those were my last 2 years, right? And you know what? These last 2 years with COVID have been easier for me than the years with anxiety.
Wow.
And so it just reaffirms that it's not about how much stress we have to deal with all the time. It's about, are we able to be regulated enough in our nervous systems to handle the stress that life is bringing us? And I don't want to oversimplify because there are people that are dealing with untenable circumstances. So COVID is that. And then people living under conditions of oppression and marginalization have a chronic level of things that they can't control. And so that's always important for me to say as a white passing, able-bodied, upper middle class person. I have the luxury to say, oh, I got all regulated. And then even though life was hard, I was okay. So I know this is not necessarily true in everybody's lived experience, although I believe it can be, because I've also worked with people that are very marginalized by the world and targeted. And I would never want to take away from someone like that the possibility to feel a sense of self-empowerment and agency, even in the face of all of that.
I'm so sorry to hear of the loss of your mother. That must have been so traumatic and stressful and horrible, heartbreaking, especially when it's your mum and your best friend and your role model. And with your husband now, is he feeling better and recovered from his operation and health and concerns?
It's a journey with the heart, because then the other organs get impacted. I mean, he's doing well, and he's still always kind of checking in on his health and his energy levels, and lots of checkups with doctors and stuff. So it's a journey. It's not over, but he's got really good care.
Did you find there was extra pressure as a mum to put that happy face on it and keep it all together?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't put a face on because I wanted to model to my kids healthy emotions. So I for sure wanted them to still feel like I had the capacity to care for them. But they saw me cry, they saw me express my fear. I didn't put it on them, right? This was not about them taking care of me, but I wanted them to see healthy grief, healthy fear, so that they have permission to have all those feelings. In fact, I'm somebody who doesn't have an easy time accessing my emotions. So I had to kind of work on allowing myself to be vulnerable in front of my children, because that's what I want to model to them. I don't want to model to them that you just pretend like everything is fine.
I love that message, because when you put on a happy face and pretend everything's good, I found from my own personal experience, you become disconnected with your truth, and you're not connected with your own self and how you're feeling. So I too have learned along the journey, it's best to express how you truly feel. And that's a much better way to feel connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're not being authentic, we can feel so lonely, right?
Yeah.
Because we feel like nobody sees us because we're not showing ourselves to them.
How does it feel to have your book out officially? We're here today with the SPAITGIRL Book Club. We're on the podcast show in Australia. Your book's out with Booktopia. It's circulating in Australia. People are starting to read it. You've been on loads of podcast shows, lots of interviews. How does it feel?
It's still really surreal, to be honest with you. I think that launching a book in COVID, where I'm not getting as much interaction with people. I mean, I'll get emails and I see the reviews go up and people tell me how it's impacted them, but it still feels really, really surreal that it's out there. I'm really proud of the book. It was living in me for a while before I wrote it. And all I want is for it to get into the hands of people who need it. I'm constantly giving copies away to anybody who needs one. And it feels really, really good. One of the other reasons I wrote the book was so many of my students and clients were asking me to make the work I had done with them available to a broader audience. They wanted to share the work with loved ones. It feels really, really great. It feels really, really great.
It's incredible, and it's amazing that we're here today talking to you about peace from anxiety. When we are going through this time where we feel really overwhelmed and maybe we just feel like we're totally stressed out, you shared a lot of practices in your book on how to feel calmer, how to feel more connected, more grounded. But if we just feel our heart race is just going through the roof, we just feel restless in the body, really stressed, is there any way we can find peace from anxiety? And could you share one technique we could try at home?
Absolutely. And I will say that these somatic tools are tools we can do in the moment to settle, but sometimes the answer is, well, I need more sleep, or I need to drink more water, or I have to set boundaries in my relationship. So I don't want to say that it's all about, just taking a deep breath. But when we feel like we have a little bit of a sense of control over our nervous system, then maybe it can help us assess, I need to set a boundary in this relationship, or I need more sleep, right? We can maybe have access to what we need overall. But one tool that I like is, I'm going to combine two. One is orienting to your environment. And I'm going to invite people to try this right now, to just look around the room that you're in and take in the colors and the textures that you see. Don't take in the things you want to organize, okay? Just colors and textures. And turn your head when you're doing this. And you can also orient with your ears if there's sounds or smells, but sight is a good one if you're a seeing person, right? And what I'll say is about 50% of people, when they do this, will settle. Not everybody, 50%. Just colors and textures. And I've done this with people when they're having a panic attack. I'll tell them, look around and name 4 blue objects in the room, for example, right? And then the second one I like, and so you can take note for yourself if this works for you.
Really love that.
Did you like that one?
Yeah, I felt really present.
Yeah. Great.
And it took my mind off all of the stress or the news or the anxiety of when are people coming out of lockdown. Really, really incredible. Amazing.
Great. Yeah, it can be like feeling like you have access to a pause button. Just slow things down a little bit. And then the second one I like, because that won't work for everybody. For some people, the orienting can kind of kick up their anxiety. The other one is to just simply put one hand on your heart and the other hand on your solar plexus. And then just notice how that feels. Notice if anything settles or feels a little bit better or more spacious. Just check in with that. And the other piece is that oftentimes when we're anxious, we're just looking for the cues of anxiety. So notice that I'm asking you to look for cues of settling. And the anxiety and the settling can coexist. Right? So sometimes the anxiety doesn't go away, but we also feel like maybe I can handle it. Maybe I can handle it. So notice how that one was.
That was so beautiful. For all of our listeners then, what a treat, what a gift, just to take a moment to feel into our body and feel into our breath, and just to take a break from that chaos, as you say on your cover of Peace from Anxiety, stay connected amidst the chaos, which was just so incredible. Now, you help so many people through their trauma with anxiety to feel more grounded, resilient, whole. How do you take care of your own self, and what are some of your self-care rituals that you like to practice?
Yeah, I mean, my self-care is like a non-negotiable for me. I will schedule in the things that I have to do above everything else. My first one is sleep. I need 7.5 hours of sleep every night. I need good quality sleep. So I protect my sleep. I don't stay up late to do things. I get up early. And of course, eating foods that really feel good in my body. And for me, it's exercise. As somebody who can tend towards anxiety, I actually need cardiovascular exercise at least 3 or 4 days a week, and interval training. Like what I've learned is I need to train my heart rate to go up and then settle, and then go up and then settle. And then I feel really grounded. So that's new that I need that. For so long, I just did yoga. And, yoga can be vigorous, and I like a vigorous practice, but I noticed that I needed to go jogging for 20 minutes twice a week, or do the Peloton for 20 minutes, right? So I started adding in short. I don't have a lot of time. So for me, it's 40 minutes of movement a day. And that's really the game changer for me. But movement in a way that regulates my nervous system. So I figured out, again, it's about intervals. It's about things that are vigorous for a short amount of time. And then it's about stretching and yoga and breath work and settling. So for some of us, the sort of gentler things, maybe if they don't work, and I'll say this to your listeners, if the orienting didn't work or the hands on the body didn't work, maybe you have the kind of nervous system that needs to go on a vigorous walk first. You need to kind of move the energy, Then you can do the more subtle practices and you feel like you settle. There's what we do in the moment, and then there's all the other stuff around it that can set the conditions for these simple practices to work.
That's incredible. And when it comes to your meditation practice, would you traditionally sit down for that? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I don't have a sitting practice. For me, yoga is like, it's a moving meditation. So I will spend 15 minutes laying on the ground, doing a few simple stretches, using the sensations in my body to ground my attention. I meditate via, the yoga practice. It's a moving meditation for me.
Wow, I love that. Thich Nhat Hanh does the walking meditation, and that reminded me instantly of his practice where you can become connected and present. We spend a lot of time, Hala, looking outside, whether that be on social media, always seeking answers from outside of us. But what I really love about your book or your messages is that it's all about finding what works for you. And you've always been so open and clear that something you might do might not work for someone else, or there's not a one size fits all. How important do you think it is for people to really just try different practices, different things to become self-aware?
That's always been important for me because I think folks are already struggling, and then to be told this technique will work, and then if it doesn't, on top of the struggle is this shame of, oh my gosh, this was supposed to work for me and it didn't. And there's not a one size fits all for managing our anxiety, and it also can change over time. It's really important for me to empower people to feel like they're experts in their own experience and that they're not going to be made wrong. Because once people don't feel this feeling of, I have to get it right, because that can get in our way as well, right? Like, I'm going to do the therapy right, or I'm going to do the technique right. That keeps us in our way. So I've worked with people now for like almost 2 decades, and trauma and anxiety shows up so differently for people. I have, one client who's got complex trauma, and pottery is what helps her. She needs to sit, the wet clay in her hands. Yoga doesn't work. The therapy barely works. So I send her to pottery class, and it regulates her.
That's incredible to see that with pottery that can help the client to relieve the anxiety. And I have spoken to other people who find like gardening or coloring in or journaling to be of help.
Yeah.
When it comes to our community at the moment, there is a lot of divide. There are people who have different ideas, different opinions, and they all want different things. How can we become more of a united community, in a way respect that we are all want different things, but instead of fighting against each other, which I see a lot at the moment,
Yeah.
we just become one? Do you have any techniques if perhaps we're even on social media and someone might have an opinion that isn't our belief or value? I often say we should just allow people to express their opinion and just acknowledge it is what it is. And I can sit with my idea, you can sit with your idea, and that's okay. But collectively, that's not been really happening at the moment in some areas and on some topics. Are there any tips on global love or global community?
I mean, a few things. I think that like having compassion for people is really important. I think people can express opinions that are dangerous and misinformed. And so how do we compassionately push back without blame or shame, and understand that potentially their opinion is grounded in trauma or disinformation, right? There's so much of that going on, unfortunately, and quote unquote opinions that can cost lives. But it's not useful to just yell at folks, right? But rather pick and choose who are the people we're going to have conversations with and who are the people we're just going to let go of. And I think there's a chapter in my book called The Global Heart that's about how I believe we're being asked to open our hearts to the globe, right? We are connected to what's happening globally via social media and the internet in a way that our ancestors weren't, right? So that can be so overwhelming, right? Our nervous systems were not designed for that. Our nervous systems are designed to care for our tribe, a few hundred people around us, and that's it. So this is why we need the grounding techniques, right? Because it's overwhelming. And then how do we get curious about what's behind people's behavior? So we're not responding to people who are in trauma or reactivity from our own trauma and reactivity. And it's not easy. And most of the time I don't engage on social media with controversial topics. I don't find it useful, but I am very public about things like vaccinations, like public health, because I think it's my responsibility as a public figure.
Thank you, Hala, for sharing that. I think as a content creator, I've discovered that if you can serve and help others, then using social media is good for that when it's of higher service and it's to empower people and to teach people a certain topic or a skill. And if we just go back to, does this serve people's life? Will it transform their life? Will it help them in their own personal life? Is it of service? I love self-help books like yours, A Peace from Anxiety. I love health and wellness or helping society. What I've discovered is if we stay in our passion and, as they say, in your laneway, then we would have a lot more harmony when we're just talking about a topic that we've lived or we know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, you're speaking to people who are forming opinions who aren't experts and who think that they can poo-poo the experts, right? And so I feel the same way. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to uplift the voices of those I trust who are experts in their field, right? So we uplift those voices, which is, I know, so much of the work that you're doing.
With your book being out, what is your hope for your book readers?
My hope for my book readers is first that they actually read the whole book, because I buy so many books and I'm so guilty of reading a book and then thinking, I have the gist of it and I'm going to stop, right? This book, every chapter is different, and it actually is leading people on a journey. So my hope is that they get through it. And that my hope is that the book opens people's hearts and minds to ways of healing they hadn't thought of before. Because there's so many different doorways in, whether it's the first section of the book, which is about the somatics, the body, the practices we did today, or the middle part, which is about relationship, that we can't be well alone, right? You can have the perfect diet and get 8 hours of sleep and do your yoga, but if we're not in healthy relationships that are affirming and connected, we're going to be anxious. We're not going to be well, right? And then the third part of the book, which is about our connection to this bigger context of the globe and who are we as global citizens. So there's 3 really distinct themes in the book. And my hope is that the book invites people to be thinking about things they hadn't realized they should be thinking about before.
And I loved how you included stories in the book as well. But how does it feel when just someone you don't know reaches out to say, thank you so much, that has truly helped me, it's transformed my life?
It's the best feeling ever. To know that I've never met this person and they were just able through the book. When I hear stories of people who say this book changed my life, helped me so much, it just feels like, okay, I've done something good. What more do we want in our lives than to feel like we're having an impact, right? So it's why I do this work, is to have an impact.
One of the things I really loved about your book, it's not just all about us as the reader in terms of if we get ourselves well and right and can cope, we're good and Who cares about everybody else? I really loved how you talked about it takes all of us to feel good, which is one of my key messages for the podcast show and the Spirit Girl community. But it takes all of us to feel good from within in order to have this really healthy, happy, feel good global community. It's just not us and no one else. It's a sort of like the coming together. And that was a very unique thing in your book. And I loved how you intertwined that in. Hala, I could talk to you forever about your book and your journey. And we've only scraped the surface, literally, on Peace from Anxiety. I want to thank you so, so much for meeting with myself today and the rest of the Spirit Girl community to share more about your work, more about your book, and to also help guide us into ways where we can feel more connected and more grounded and have more compassion for each other during these chaotic times. So thank you. I'm so grateful for your work.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I know I could keep talking to you forever.
I know. I'm mindful of your time, however. So how can we stay in touch with you now after this podcast show?
The best way is to go to my website, halakhouri.com, HALAKHOURI, and you can have access to the book. I have a monthly membership community that's really, really special. I send people videos and practices, and we have live meetings online to get to know each other. It's called Radical Wellbeing. And it's all about building community together so we can be well together. And in fact, the topics every month are very related to the book. We love people to join into the Radical Wellbeing community, and all that is on my website.
I love that. You've got so much free content, and even on YouTube, and you're very accessible, and your heart and soul, you just beam out to the world. You're shining so brightly. Everyone, you've got to go to the Spirit Girl YouTube channel so you can just see how happy Hala is and how her aura and positivity and love and joy just shines. It's just like so bright, like this light. And it's really what we need in these times. So thank you again, Hala Khouri, for meeting with us today on the Spirit Girl podcast show. Super grateful. We'll say goodbye to you now. So thank you again.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. So Spirit Girl podcast listeners, I want to say thank you for joining in also globally. Thank you for joining in. I would love if you would subscribe to the podcast show, to leave a 5-star rating and review, and to tell someone you love too. And together, let's feel good from within.